Welcome back, everybody. It's Mario from Highlander TCG, and I've come to give you guys my Wecross Ceremony tournament breakdown plus my second place Harana build. And I'm going to talk about a lot here. I know it's been a while since I posted a video. I was sick for 2 weeks, so I've been quite out of commission. And I would, even while partially sick, I still participated in the tournament, and I was able to get second place. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get first, but we'll go ahead and talk about that later. Right now, we're just going to go ahead and jump straight into the deck list. So once again, I was playing Harana No Limit. My For those of you who want my list, here you guys go. It's also posted on the Carta Magica. They did do like the Google Docs, all the top 8 lists. And so, despite the representation that No Limit had, I believe it was about 31 No Limit players in total. I know a lot of people were afraid to play No Limit this time around because Nova was very strong in this format, and going against Harana is kind of like a 60-40 matchup, in my personal opinion. But the reason why I picked No Limit and Harana was because I felt like in a field, it has better matchups. It punishes more decks overall. And the deck is just very well rounded and very strong. It's consistent at what it does, and so on and so forth. But that is the reason why I didn't choose Nova. I ended up losing to Nova in the finals, but there are some pretty major factors that I want to talk about. But we'll talk about that in the matchup breakdown. So first, we're just going to go ahead and run straight through the deck list here. It is No Limit, so there's not too much to talk about, but I will talk about some important card choices maybe for the future. But yeah, let's go ahead and start from the bottom. So we run Eternal Influence and one Zhao Yun. Honestly, the one Zhao Yun did not matter at all. This can actually be any card. I didn't know what to put in this slot because I was trying to figure out my ratios, and I also was trying to find my second foil Eternal Influence, and I couldn't find it, so I just ended up sleeving up a Zhao Yun. The Eternal Influence was very impactful. Honestly, quite a bit of matchups. The ones that I did see, I believe I saw 3 or 4 out of 7 games, and it played well. The Exceed, it is your only way to exceed, and so it gives you a way to use that. It is also a very good way to bait out the spell negate from your opponent if they're playing Nova. And so this card is just very strong. It's a very good card. I would consider playing maybe even like another Exceed spell, maybe like a Miracle Draw, as just like a one of, just to be able to use the Exceed costs. But overall, a very good card. Next, we have 4 Romel. There's not much to explain here. You're always going to play 4 of this in every, pretty much almost every red deck, or just in No Limit in general. This card's insanely strong. Not much to explain here. 4 Percival, the dual color. So I know some people play Zhao Yun in this slot. I don't think, I think running Zhao Yun along with something like Arcane and Armlight give you too much white. And that would be like roughly like a fourth of your deck, almost around like 10 plus cards. And you don't want that because it does affect your Rose Quartz, and you want to be having the red enter to be able to pay for that, especially in this format. It's very important. So yeah, and there wasn't that many punishes to this. If I didn't really expect to be playing against Harana as much, and if that were the case, I would be playing more Zhao. But I expected a very strong mix of No Limit and Nova. So that's the reason why. And Zhao Yun doesn't do anything in the Nova matchup. For Lancelot, once again, this card is insanely strong. Not much to talk about. It's just a very good card. You're going to always play it in this deck. 3 Rose Quartz. So I wanted to play 4, but I couldn't find my 4th copy. So I ended up putting in a copy of Mars. But as for Rose Quartz, you pretty much want to have at bare minimum 3 copies. I would consider it very like a 4 in this format specifically because Nova is just so strong and so dominant that you want to have the answer to it at all times. But either way, once again, it's just a strong card, and at 4 now is even better. 2 copies of Nobunaga. This is just a powerhouse of a red card. 13k body is pretty much hard to get rid of in both the mirror match and for Nova. They don't have any removal. Most of their stuff caps out at 12k. So Nobunaga is just really good. The Double Crush is insanely good, especially since I'm playing Go to the Top. It creates that good old No Limit special where you can go to the top them and then Double Crush with Glory Grow. And create that fully lethal board state. But I didn't do that like a single time in this in this tournament. But Nobunaga is still a strong card. I would consider cutting it to 1. The pay 1 remove didn't come up as often, but I pretty much used it only for Double Crush when I needed to. The pay 1 remove I think only came up in one of my games. But aside from that, still a strong card. The one of Mars, this card's amazing. I think a lot of people were too scared to run this because of how much discard there is, but this into a lot of matchups just was was pretty like relevant because getting that assassin to create that lethal board state against like an art gain or even like a 13k stat stick is really important. So I think playing the one Mars is um, pretty necessary. So let's go ahead and talk about the triggers. For Servant, we're not going to talk about this. No reason to. For Sita, this card was the absolute MVP of this tournament. The every single time that I hit, I think there's only one matchup that it fizzled, but every single matchup that I hit Sita and it resolved. And Sita is just such a powerhouse of a trigger. It's so good. It's just free flat removal, and it hits a very good majority of the targets in this game. The only time it's pretty much turned off is when your opponent is at like full level 3 and they put like a 10k level 2 and like two 12ks. But aside from that, pretty much I would say 90% of the game Sita is always live. Next is for Armlight. This card was very underwhelming in this tournament, unfortunately, because of the lack of like aggro matchups and more control. This card just didn't show up. It was basically like a draw one, and that is just very underwhelming and unimpactful. It did play a major role in my second game. I played against Diagram Musica, and I believe on his turn 2, he went for a pretty large push, and I hit it off the first damage and stopped the next 2 attacks. I then proceeded to take the Elric attack, hit an art gain, and was able to bounce one of the ups because it doesn't leave them up. But aside from that, I think this card is probably my first pick at cutting. I don't think it performed well, and I don't think it's going to perform well moving forward into in this format specifically. And so, yeah, I'm going to talk about what I would consider cutting for this, or what I would cut this out for. Sorry. So next is 2 Argin or 2 Argwin. I still have a little bit of mixed feelings about this card. This card is insanely powerful, but pretty much I believe it's only good in the mirror, and I did only play against the mirror once in the tournament. But it did end up mattering because the shadow did stick, and it was able to basically prevent a damage. But aside from that, I believe most of the time I used it was for a pay 1 plus off of like top decks from when I get my hands ripped out. But aside from that, I probably would keep this at 2, and just 2 alone because it is such a powerhouse of a card. But I believe you only want to see probably 1 a game, especially if you expect to be playing against Nova. If you're playing against more Hirana, you can probably bump it up to 3 in consideration. 2 Kagasuchis. So during your turn, you can give all your units plus 2k, and then it has the discard 2 to resurrect a 3. So I wanted to do this to kind of round up my level 3 lineup. It was kind of like my excuse for not having the 4th worst card, so I decided to run this. But aside from that, and even in my last deck that I got 8th place with, I did run 4 of this because the trigger to summon is so underrated in No Limit. It is almost like invaluable, and I think a lot of people kind of miss that because being able just to summon any of these 5, 9, any of these 13 cards right here is almost the same effect as like a Folklore trigger because you could just put it in front of a second attack, one of the attacks, and then pop the other. So that's why this trigger is just insanely strong. It did end up coming up once in a specific matchup. It didn't end up technically mattering, but if I didn't have like a Mars, it would basically guaranteed me the game. But aside from that, this card is insanely powerful. And I personally think a lot of No Limit players do sleep on how strong that effect is. Last but not least, for Deafening Inferno, this is a mandatory 4 of. I don't think I would ever cut this. I don't think any No Limit player would ever cut this card. It's just really powerful. Talking about the Elric deck, it's very, very cutthroat, very same. Just running both the draw raise. These are good because you need the hand advantage. Both of the bounce Akinos. Once again, very cheap, cost effective. The bounce is insanely strong in this deck. Because it not only denies enter, it also plays around certain cards. It could get around like the 12Ks of Ishikishimaru and something like Primora, which I want to talk about a little later too. And then as for the pieces, I ran to go to the top, and then obviously Glory Grow. I'm not going to talk about Glory Grow, but go to the top. This is very cuttable. I did use it almost every single game, but it wasn't as impactful as I wanted it to be. The reason why I picked it was because I knew there was going to be a lot of people on Nova and a lot of people probably on No Limit still, and they weren't going to be running Xenocluster. So I pretty much made a meta call there that not a lot of people are going to be on Xenocluster, and this card is basically like free reign, which I was mostly correct. I think out of all my matchups, I think only one person played Xenocluster, and it wasn't even for the enter. But yeah. So let's go ahead and move on. We're gonna go ahead and talk about the matchups. This will be pretty quick. So round one was against Uchi Tamago. This is a very fast matchup. Two of their servants were in their life cloth, and I just kind of was able to run over them from like turn 1 and 2. I just had very strong aggression. They didn't have much defense going on, and they didn't hit any real beneficial life burst. So it was just a very fast match. Round two was against Diagram. I was against Musica. This is against a fairly well-known player. A lot of you may know him, but I won't mention him by name. Um, this matchup was very close, honestly. Despite me being able to hit that arm light, it pretty much came down to my opponent being able to top deck a way to remove a 5K, and they unfortunately didn't. And so that's what the determining factor of the game was. My opponent also did make a misplay, but that was very important. But it is a large tournament, so misplays are bound to happen. My third round was against Uchi. This was my first Nova matchup of today. One of my two. This was a very convincing win. I was able to hit Citas, and I did vanish the closed lanes with the Ichis instead of vanishing opening lanes, which is a little bit more riskier because I do take more damage overall, shortening the game. But I think playing like that is very important because there's not a lot of answers to Ishihishimaru, especially on like turn 2. Your only answers are mainly in turn 3. So using Sita to create more aggression is very important, and that's how I was able to eventually win the matchup because I just had so much pressure on my turn 2 and turn 3 combined. And yeah, so my round 4 was against the mirror match. This was against a Twitch streamer named Guided Misplays. If you guys want to check him out, I will put the description in the link, or I'll put the link in the description down below. And if you guys want to check it out, I was on stream with him, and we did play the game out. Once again, I think Arkwin was a pretty large factor in this game. There's a couple. I feel like there's another, or there's a couple others, but I honestly don't remember them because it was a very fast game. I believe it was like probably like less than like 10 minutes, and it's just as expected from Harana Mirrors. It was very very fast paced, lots of removal, lots of board clearing, and so um, personally, it's out of all the matchups, it's probably the one, like I said, the one that I remember the least because of how fast it was. And I didn't watch the VOD yet, so I don't really remember too much about it. But if you guys want to check it out, once again, I'll leave the Twitch channel in the description down below. Round 5 was against Card Jockey Lion. This was also streamed on the Carta Magica stream. I will also leave a link to that in the description down below if you guys want to check that out. This was a very unfortunate game for the Lion player. I believe on like my turn 2, which is like my big push turn, they hit a Haniel and they weren't able to summon because they were at level 2 and they hit like 2 3s and a spell, I believe. They also hit 2 on their punchline, and it was also what is it again? That was also when I hit the Kagasuchi into Rose Quartz to vanish their art gain on their turn. So yeah, it was a very rough matchup for the card jockey player. However, once again, I still think this matchup is fairly favored for No Limit. Card jockey does have a way to aggressively push, but there are board setups they can't really contest to. Their new Wolf assist is very good, but once again, I just think this matchup is a lot more favored for Harana. Round 6 was against Tamago, another Uchi deck. This was a very good player. This game was very close, pretty much. I came down to the final life burst to be able to prevent the game. And I think another determining factor, Mars was a pretty big. I believe Mars was a pretty major factor in this game as well too. But I was able to create a lethal board state like on turn 4 or 5, which was a lot earlier than the Tamago player expected. And despite how the game went, there's 2 very major factors, and that was Sita and Akino. Mono Blue got Primora, which is when it's vanished, you can freeze a Signy. And I believe at like the end of the turn, it also freezes something. But every time that they tried to play it, especially like during their turn, I hit a Sita to be able to vanish it, and they got off like a useless freeze from it. And then the following ones, I was able just to bounce with Akino, which answering these are very important, especially for Harana, because these can be ways or deterrents to be able to not be able to make like attacks. So yeah, Primor is a very strong card, and just having like the natural outs to it is very good. And so, but I want to talk a little bit more about Tamago later because I think Tamago is very strong actually, and especially my after playing against my opponent, I see why now. And yeah, so last but not least, the finals. This was a very unfortunate match for me. This was probably my worst match of the entire tournament, and I went EXO the whole tournament with pretty back or most of my games were fairly back and forth. I had a lot of close games. There's only I believe like 2 stomps out of like the other 6 rounds. But this one was just very unfortunate for me. If you guys want to check this one out, this one's also on stream. It's very fast because of how bad it was for me. So I believe it was my turn 2 that I was able to open up my opponent's board, and as soon as I like went in for my attack, they hit a Ishikishimaru off damage, and they're able to summon one. I think it might have happened on the second attack. I'm not too sure. So they're able to block off more damage. And then from there, I pretty much drew dead for 3 turns in a row. I believe it was out of roughly 3 different draw phases that I drew in total 5 vanillas. And I play 8 vanillas in my deck. And I don't think I saw or I had a single Sita in my life cloth that game. And yeah, so I was just running out of gas. I didn't find like pretty much any of my removal. Um, I had to use a lot of my draws too late. My major misplay was on turn 3 when I didn't activate Glory Grow. If you guys are wondering why I didn't activate Glory Grow there when I was able to open up his whole board, it's because I was thinking on the previous turn how I only had 2 ways to open 2 lanes, and then as my turn came by, I realized that I realized I found a way to open the 3rd lane, but I had already went to attack phase, and obviously this is a major tournament. You know, there's no take backs. You can't just go back. And so as soon as I declared attack phase, I was already in there, and I had already realized that I should have activated Glory Grow, which once again I don't remember the ordering of his life cloth, but it could have very much mattered because getting out this life cloth early could have made a major difference, and it also would have gave him incentive to activate Bang because Bang was held over me that like whole game. He even got to a turn where he was able to stop both my one open lane and my outbreak attack with just Bang alone, and um, not forcing my opponent to consider the Bang there was a very determining factor in how the game played out. And yeah, I just ended up giving him such a large lead. I was so behind in damage. I was basically doing like 1 damage a turn. And it was just a very rough game for me. I'm not going to discredit my opponent though. My opponent did play very well. My opponent was just straight up looking to sponge out every card for me. They played around the up removal and everything, so props to them for sure. But I just ran very poorly, and that was like one of the major factors in that game for me. But aside that, it was a great tournament, and I was happy to place second overall, and just show that Hirana is still very playable in this format. So let's go ahead and talk about deck changes and considerations. There's not a lot of them, despite No Limit being a very diverse deck. But I feel like my list would be very close to the perfect list in that build in particular. But so one of the considerations is like the 8 Folklore trigger build, which is like the 4 Trouble, 4 Folklore, or like 4 Folklore, 2 Arm Light, and like 2 Trouble. But I put these cards here because it does come in a package. This deck is like pretty high on its level 2 count. I believe you're running like you could be running anywhere from like 10 to 11 level 2s, which is quite a high count. But yeah, this is all in one package. So the reason why I would say this is a good consideration is because you get access to Trouble, which is able to fill you back up on cards, and honestly, probably the spell negate target for your opponent. And then you also get to play cards like Hichikata because the Hichikata Tobio does kind of fall into this package because Tobio discards your dead troubles if you have any, giving you just a little bit more card draw on the deck. But more importantly, it turns on Hichikata, and Hichikata against Nova is pretty strong because it helps you snipe out those servants, and also it lets you fight back with discard of your own. And doing that gives you some form of advantage when you're, instead of having to aggressively remove the board in some instances where you can't too, you're able just to start ripping cards out of their hands. And in that matchup, like I said, it's very important for you to rip out cards because, like I said, you can hit servants. However, I wasn't able to try this specifically into the Nova matchup. This is really good into aggro matchups when you're expecting a lot of more Hirana because you have 8 of those tap down triggers. and that trigger is very very strong into aggro because pretty much it makes every time they open your board a threat for them, because if they hit one of these, it could just pretty much end their whole turn. But yeah, it's just a consideration. Not saying it's better or worse. It's just a consideration. Um, the other consideration is volcanic. So this is basically level 2 Sita. This has the exact same trigger to banish an AK or less. Like I said, Sita was the MVP of this entire tournament, and just like my deck as a whole. Every time I hit Sita, it felt amazing, and so I would even consider playing 8 copies of Sita, and that's how strong Sita was in the tournament. And so volcanic is a very easy slot in if you want to just get rid of the armlet, which like I said was very underwhelming. But yeah, very just overall very strong trigger, and you can round it out with even more copies of it. Next card is Thrilling. So if you are going to be on like this bluish deck, you technically can run Thrilling, and I'm not fully opposed to it. Even if you run just like 4 Folklore, and you can just like slot in 2 of these, and you might actually have something plausible there. Like I said, I haven't tried it, but I might consider it in the future because you do need more gas in this kind of format. There's a lot of discard, and so having a card like this just to refill your hand is pretty valuable to the deck and worth considering. Next for the outrages is Ray Absolute Zero. So this card is kind of weird. I do think it's very powerful because it does give you another form of hard removal, and plus sometimes it can also be able to rip a card out of your opponent's hand. But however, the only downside I would say is just the 3 enter cost. Because I was playing Go to the Top is the reason why I didn't play this. I actually was playing this in a previous list, but I ended up taking it out pretty much last second, and I thought the card draw was just more valuable from the other way. But I do think this card is pretty strong, especially going into Nova. You have 2 ways to fully get rid of their Kome or their Demeter, and so that's like very good too. Next are the pieces. So I will, if I do play this in the next tournament, I will 100% take out Go to the Top if I'm expecting just like Nova. Because once again, Go to the Top resolved, and I didn't get Xenoclustered a single time, but it just didn't end up having the results I wanted to. I was never able to make like really large plays off of it. I think the only one time it mattered was against the card jockey player. It basically just ensured that they weren't able to love it, but honestly, I don't think it really mattered in that much and too much, just personally. But yeah. So Xenocluster is obviously a very strong card into any format that has heavy discard or heavy abilities that take enter, and so I would honestly probably play this for sure. But I do think that Burning Curiosity is also a heavy consideration because pay 1 removal at any time is just very, very good. And it also gives you another way to use your Exceed. But I did play with Burning Curiosity previously. And once again, like I said, I slotted it out very last second, and I kind of do regret it. I do think it would have been very strong in this format, and I do think it would have performed very well. Just like I said, that pay 1 removal whenever you need it is like almost invaluable. And these are the 2 pieces I would definitely decide on playing if I were to play this again in the next tournament. But aside that, I wanted to go ahead and run down the top 8 and the team breakdown. So for team breakdown, there was 2 Angel Surprise, 30 card jockey, 22 diagram, 6 mixed teams, 31 no limit, and then 26 Uchu. Honestly, surprisingly, quite a bit of no limit. I don't know how many between Ray and Harana. I kind of wish that they had that split available for us. But I know there is a lot of people very hyping up Ray. I believe one Ray made it into top 8. But there is a couple things I do want to talk about when it comes to Ray and just this overall format, especially with Nova, I think taking 3 slots out of top 8, and just being once again like the big talk of the format. But overall, fairly diverse format, a lot more diverse than I honestly anticipated, which is really cool. The 30 card jockey is pretty surprising to me. I know card jockey is very popular over here in the North American version of the game for sure, but I don't think card jockey is the pick, and I'll talk about that a little later too. And then as for top 8, once again, Nova won. Harana was second place. I think third place was the Tamago deck. fourth place was the Madoka deck, and fifth through eighth I don't remember specifically, but I know there is like I think there's two other Novas, a Ray, and I think a single card jockey. I don't remember which placements that they got, but you know, once again, very honestly pretty good top eight. Pretty spread out, but I like I said, I do have some expectations for the following format. So let's go ahead and talk about those next ceremony considerations. This may be considerably a hot take um, to some people. This is pretty strong opinion. So I don't know how people would feel about this one, but I'm going to talk about it regardless because I do think blue is very strong in this exact format. If you're expecting Nova, I do think these following blue decks are very good into this into that kind of metagame. And especially with Nova taking first place, I do think it's going to be a little bit more popular than it already is. So, with that being said, I do think I am going to go ahead and talk about why I do think these decks are very strong. So, Tamago was very surprising to me. The sixth place or the sixth round, and the third place player who won or who got third with Tamago. He played against I don't know what it ended up being his last round, but he played against 4 rounds of Nova before he played against me, and he was 6-0 at the time, or I mean 5-0 at the time, I believe. And just thinking about the matchup and like what we talked about very briefly, Tamago is honestly fairly favored against Nova because you in Tamago you have a larger amount of card generation, and you're a heavier discard deck along with the freeze package. You're pretty much denying enter, which hurts the overall like Kome and the double grow from Nova's side. You discard their hand, so pretty much every time that or you discard their hand pretty much almost every turn. So they're working with 2 cards a turn, and then they're gonna only end up with having 1 card in hand. After they grab a servant, which you're easily able to discard as Tamago, especially with your once a game. It's like basically a counter. And along with just the freeze engine as a whole, you're able to just gum up their board with freeze and not allow them to have any enter or just any cards at all. Um, and yeah, I think it's just very good. They also got some major support with Primora and Waffle Ice. Waffle Ice just being a good way to generate card advantage and with a solid trigger, and then Primora just being a very strong defensive grade 2, or I mean level 2 for those like aggro matchups. However, Tamago does not fare well into aggro matchups in specific because like against like something like Harana or even Card Jockey, it does struggle in those matchups. But if you are expecting more Nova than any of those, which Nova does do well into those matchups, I do think Tamago is like a very strong pick and a very considerable pick at that. So take a look at that third place list, and we might even talk about it in the future video, and just start working from there. Because like I said, I would not sleep on Tamago. Next is Madoka. So Diagram as a whole does a couple of things that other decks that can't really do well, and that's playing pretty much back with both assists and being able to also reuse your assists. And one major thing that I do think Madoka is very strong with is the Hichikata on turn 2. Just enabling this play is like very strong. You get to run a Xeno cluster without any punishing as well. I believe it was the fourth place player who was playing Madoka did perform fairly well in the tournament as well. And I also do think Madoka, despite being more blue oriented, is one of the best shells for Osagitsune. And Osagitsune is very good into Nova. And just overall, Osagitsune is already known to be a very strong card, but it is even better against Nova because you just have almost infinite targets to hit. And Osagitsune is always live in that matchup. And when you're pretty much having guaranteed removal alongside with some medium discard, you're going to be put into a very well position. Hichikata is a power card against Nova specifically, like I previously stated. Effectively ripping 2 cards away from them is pretty detrimental to Nova, and that's why I would say like Nova or Madoka is a very strong consideration. And also because of Salvage the Future, you can mill out their deck and have force them to refresh with their servants going back. And there are even cases where you're even able to leave them a one card in deck. And after some point, Nova does start to run out of gas, and so that's why I do think like these discard decks are very very good to get into a Nova centric format. And I'm not saying that these are good and well rounded, but into Nova specifically, they're very good. And I do think Madoka is probably the best to play across the field in terms of how it fares as a blue or amongst these blue decks. I think it fares the best in a field, and so that's why I would say that Madoka is a very good consideration. And so as for Ray's a little bit different. I'm not. I think this is probably the worst out of these three, or out of this whole lineup. And the reason for that is because one, I don't think there's a perfect Ray build out there. I think Ray's very hard to build, and I think it would take some time to find for someone to find that list. But I think whoever finds that list, they're going to be very ahead in this format. That pay two to remove anything, or I mean, level 2 or less Signy is very strong, and you get that pretty much every single turn with Ray. If you built the deck correctly. And I think the best thing about Ray is that because it's in no limit specifically, you do get access to Glory Grow, which easily can push a damage lead. You can play Rose Quartz, which is one of their best cards if you're able to find the space for red. And alongside all of that, you do have the ability to discard. It's kind of like on the same realms of Madoka, where you have like this discard plus removal. But the bigger difference is that this one has Glory Grow, and Glory Grow is just a very unfair and insanely powerful card. So that's why I do think Ray is a consideration. But I do think it is the worst one out of all these three, just as I've seen. But that does not mean I would sleep on it. That's why I'm talking about it here. Ray doesn't have any major power cards in terms of Signy, but it is, like I said, once again, because it's in no limit, it does get access to better cards than these other two, which is like, stuff like Lancelot and Rose Quartz. And that alone with like a kind of like mini discard engine can be very very good. This Ray can also technically run Hijikata, and because it does run a lot of the ditch draw effects, but I'm not too sure like how strong that is. But either way, props to the player. I believe who got within top 8 with this. But I do think there might be more to explore with Ray, and I hope people explore more, and I will try to explore more myself. But aside that, once again, these are just my opinions. If you guys have anything to share, if you guys feel a certain way, just let me know in the comments down below. I'd be glad to talk about it. Like I said, this is kind of like a hot take, saying that blue is very strong, and but I do once again, I do think blue is good into a Nova specific format, not into like a Harana specific format or anything like that. But yeah. And so that's pretty much going to be it for the video. Once again, for anybody who wants to watch any of the streamed gameplay from of some of my matches, I'll leave the Twitch links in the description down below. There are exactly 3 games that I was in. Let me know what you guys think about the video, about my list, about this whole breakdown. What you guys expect. Once again, as I reiterate, there is one more tournament in this format, and I'm looking to snatch that first place. I'm not looking to get second place again, and I'm going to figure out what I'm going to play, or what changes I would make to this deck in particular to be able to do that. And yeah, so that's going to be it for the video, guys. I hope you guys enjoy. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you guys in the next one.